course, I'm Treasure Wilson, aka Stat Baby, along with your hosts, Cam and Mace.
What's going on? You good?
Yeah, how you doing? You all right?
Yeah, nigga.
I'm good, nigga. You been taking P94, what's it called? P90, and you feeling yourself because you lost 3 pounds. The fit is back out. You cleaned your jewelry. You feeling yourself. You ain't even take your sticker off your hat. You feeling yourself. Whatever that, what is it, P90 what?
P98.
All right, cool. I'm going to go get me some of that shit because the attitude been a little different the last week or so.
Today is a very special episode. We are joined by 2 special guests, Gilly and...
Stop everything, because what just exploded behind the microphones is not what anybody was promised. What was marketed as $1 million reunion turned into the most uncomfortable, competitive, ego-charged collision hip-hop podcasting has ever seen. When Ma Dollar E and Cameron agreed to sit down and cash in together, fans expected nostalgia, jokes, brotherhood. What they got instead was tension so loud it didn't need subtitles. Because from the very first episode, something felt off. The laughs hit late. The jokes cut deep. The pauses said more than the punchlines. What sounded like banter felt like scorekeeping, and what looked like chemistry felt like 2 legends daring each other to blink first. Viewers didn't imagine it. Insiders say the rivalry ignited the moment the contracts were signed, and the cameras only caught the aftermath. This wasn't just a podcast launch. It was a power struggle disguised as content. Who controls the room? Who controls the clips? Who controls the narrative when both men believe they built the legacy? Harlem history was suddenly being audited in real time, and every sentence sounded like evidence. Social media clocked it instantly. Viral clips, side-by-side breakdowns, fans picking sides like it's a championship series. And the scariest part? The show is thriving, numbers are up, sponsors are happy. Which means walking away would look like losing, and staying means swallowing pride. This isn't friendly competition anymore. This is the beginning of a rivalry that money, memories, and microphones are about to make way messier than anyone's ready for. The first thing everyone got wrong was assuming this was ever just a podcast. From the moment Ma Dollar E and Cameron agreed to lock in $1 million collaboration, the energy stopped being nostalgic and started being territorial. Harlem history doesn't reunite quietly, especially when there's real money, real control, and real legacy on the line. Insiders say the smiles at the announcement were genuine, but they were also calculated. What fans heard as playful banter in the early episodes, people behind the scenes recognized immediately as positioning. Every interruption, every joke that ran a beat too long, every "I remember it differently." Those weren't accidents. They were signals, because when 2 icons share a mic, the fight isn't about airtime, it's about authorship. Who tells the story? Who frames the past? Who gets remembered as the driver instead of the passenger? Sources claim the tension started before a single episode aired. Contract talks reportedly exposed a fault line neither side wanted to address publicly. Creative authority. Not money, that part was locked. Authority, final say. Editorial control. Clip approval, rollout decisions. One camp wanted structure and restraint, the other wanted raw chaos and viral moments. Same goal, different philosophies. And when neither budges, compromise turns into quiet competition. Listeners could hear it immediately. Ma Dollar E's delivery came off calm, surgical, almost minimalist, letting silence do the heavy lifting. Cameron, by contrast, dominated space with volume, humor, and momentum, steering conversations with the confidence of someone who expects the room to follow. On the surface, it sounded entertaining. Underneath, it sounded like 2 leadership styles colliding. The first viral clip didn't even seem explosive at first glance. A throwaway comment about who really put the work in back then. Laughter from the room that didn't quite land. Cam grinning like he'd scored a point. Ma Dollar E not reacting at all. Twitter did the rest. That was shade. Nah, that was personal. Why he let that sit like that? Once the audience senses tension, it magnifies everything. Insiders say both camps began tracking metrics obsessively after that moment. Which clips performed better? Whose quotes trended? Who the comments favored? Numbers turned into silent scoreboards, and collaboration quietly morphed into comparison. When success becomes something you measure against your partner instead of with them, resentment doesn't creep in, it moves in. As episodes rolled out, old stories resurfaced, but not in the same tone. Same events, different emphasis. One side highlighted sacrifice and restraint, the other emphasized dominance and leadership. Neither version was false, but they weren't compatible. History became a chessboard, and each anecdote felt like a move designed to reclaim narrative territory. Behind the cameras, insiders describe the vibe as polite but strained. Conversations shorter. Decisions rooted through teams instead of direct dialogue. When intermediaries enter a creative partnership, it's rarely because everything is fine. One source said, they still respect each other, but respect doesn't erase competition. And competition is lethal when it's unspoken. Money poured gasoline on everything. $1 million deal doesn't just raise expectations. It raises stakes. Suddenly, every sentence feels monetized. Every laugh feels intentional. Every disagreement feels like it's costing or earning something. Sources say there were moments when the room stopped feeling like friends talking and started feeling like two brands negotiating live on air. Fans didn't just listen, they investigated. Body language breakdowns flooded TikTok. Clip compilations compared who interrupted whom. Comment sections turned into trial transcripts. Old interviews resurfaced as receipts. Harlem loyalty lines got redrawn in real time. The audience wasn't just entertained, it was emotionally invested, and that investment fed the rivalry. The tension peaked during a conversation about legacy. Who sacrificed more? Who stayed solid longer? Who carried the weight when things got dark? The room laughed, but the laughter was nervous. That wasn't content anymore, that was accounting. And accounting always leads to audits. Insiders whisper the real fracture came after a private disagreement over guest strategy. One side wanted culture-defining voices, the other wanted viral volatility. Different paths to relevance, same microphone. When compromise failed, the disagreement bled into the show, redirected questions, sharper jokes, pauses loaded with meaning. You didn't have to know the backstory to feel it. And yet the numbers kept climbing. Sponsors smiled. Clips went viral, which made everything worse. Because success became a trap. Walking away would look like losing. Staying meant enduring a dynamic that was growing more competitive by the episode. Neither man built a career on backing down. This first phase is still controlled, still wrapped in humor, still framed as that's just how they joke. But insiders agree, this is the calmest it's going to be. Because the real question hasn't been asked out loud yet, the one that never stays buried when legends share a spotlight and a bag. When the money is big and the history is heavy, who's really in charge? That question is already in the room. And once it's asked openly, the podcast stops being entertainment and turns into a showdown. By the time the second phase kicked in, the rivalry stopped feeling accidental and started feeling deliberate. Not because either Ma Dollar E or Cameron openly declared war, but because the energy in the room hardened. The jokes sharpened. The interruptions increased. The smiles stayed, but they didn't reach the eyes anymore. This was no longer two Harlem legends feeling their way through a new format. This was two veterans testing boundaries in public. Insiders say the shift happened the moment both sides realized the audience wasn't just watching, it was keeping score. Every episode became a referendum. Who got the bigger laugh? Who told the story better? Who sounded more authoritative about the past? Metrics that were supposed to measure success started measuring dominance instead. And once dominance becomes measurable, egos don't just react, they strategize. The show's rhythm changed. Early episodes flowed loosely, stories overlapping naturally. Now conversations felt segmented, almost boxed in. One person would take the floor and write a story long enough to establish ownership. The other would respond not by contradicting directly, but by reframing, shifting emphasis, correcting details, reasserting perspective. Same facts, different power plays. Listeners could hear the tension in the pacing alone. Fans noticed immediately. Comment sections filled with timestamps. Listen at 14:32. Watch his face right here. Why he cut him off like that? The podcast stopped being background noise and became content to be dissected. And once that happens, the hosts don't control the conversation anymore, the audience does. Behind the scenes, sources say production meetings grew tense. Not loud, but loaded. Decisions that should have been routine started taking longer. Clip selection became a negotiation. Which moments got pushed? Which moments stayed buried? Insiders claim both sides felt the other was subtly steering the narrative, not lying, but highlighting themselves. And in a space built on storytelling, highlighting is power. The tension bled into guest discussions. One camp wanted high-level cultural voices who'd elevate the show's credibility. The other wanted unpredictable personalities who'd guarantee viral moments. Different philosophies, same goal, relevance. But relevance achieved through different lanes creates friction fast. When compromise stalled, the disagreement didn't stay in the meeting room, it showed up in tone. Listeners heard it as sarcasm masked as humor. Questions framed a little too pointed. Responses delivered a little too carefully. Even laughter felt selective. The chemistry that once felt organic now felt performative, like both men were aware of being watched not just by fans, but by each other. Insiders say money intensified everything. $1 million collaboration doesn't just reward success, it punishes imbalance. If one person is perceived as carrying the show, resentment grows. If one person feels overshadowed, insecurity spikes. And if both believe they're the reason it works, cooperation turns into competition overnight. Social media poured gasoline on the fire. Viral clips didn't just circulate, they got framed. Titles implying dominance. Thumbnails choosing sides. Narratives formed that the hosts themselves never stated out loud. And once the internet picks a storyline, it dares the subjects to contradict it. Silence gets interpreted as confirmation. Pushback gets framed as defensiveness. Insiders claim this is where things got personal, not in arguments but in tone memory. Old grievances resurfaced without being named. Past sacrifices hinted at. Leadership questioned indirectly. The past wasn't being revisited for nostalgia anymore, it was being audited. Who showed up when it mattered? Who carried weight? Who made the harder calls? Every story felt like a ledger entry. Fans split into camps. Harlem loyalty lines got redrawn. One side praised calm intelligence and restraint. The other celebrated dominance and authenticity. The rivalry stopped being just between the hosts. It spread outward, pulling the audience into the dynamic. And once fans start fighting for you, the pressure to win increases. Off-camera sources describe a colder vibe, fewer casual conversations, more communication through teams, less spontaneity. When intermediaries replace direct dialogue, trust has already thinned. One insider put it bluntly, they still respect each other, they just don't trust the room anymore. The most dangerous part of this phase was how well the show was performing. Every viral moment reinforced the idea that tension was good for business. That conflict drove engagement. That rivalry sold. And once that belief sets in, it becomes tempting, even unconsciously, to lean into the friction. But leaning into friction has consequences, because what starts as controlled tension rarely stays controlled. Each episode raises the bar. Each jab needs to hit harder to feel new. Each disagreement needs to feel sharper to stand out. And eventually, someone says something that can't be reframed as a joke. Insiders say both men felt the pressure, but interpreted it differently. One saw the tension as part of the entertainment, something that could be managed. The other saw it as erosion, something that would eventually undermine the partnership entirely. That difference in interpretation alone widened the gap. Listeners could feel it too. The show didn't sound lighter anymore. It sounded tighter. Less room to breathe, less room to misspeak. Everything felt intentional, and intentionality kills ease. As this second phase settled in, one truth became unavoidable. The podcast wasn't just capturing rivalry, it was manufacturing it. Every episode added another layer. Another comparison, another subtle line drawn. And the audience, hungry for drama, rewarded it every time. This is the dangerous middle stage, the point where success masks instability, where the bag keeps everyone in place, where walking away feels impossible and staying feels heavier by the week. The rivalry hadn't exploded yet, but it was no longer theoretical. It was embedded in the format, reinforced by numbers, and amplified by an audience that had already chosen sides, whether the hosts wanted that or not. And once a rivalry reaches this stage, the next phase isn't about tension. It's about collision. By the time the third phase took hold, the rivalry stopped feeling like tension you could joke away and started feeling like something that wanted an outcome. Not resolution, not peace. An outcome. The energy in the room shifted from competitive to consequential, and everyone involved could feel it tightening. What once passed as banter now carried stakes. What once sounded playful now sounded measured, like every word had been weighed for impact. Insiders say this was the point where both men realized the same uncomfortable truth at the same time. The podcast no longer belonged to either of them individually. It belonged to the conflict. The audience wasn't tuning in for nostalgia anymore. They were tuning in to see who would slip first, who would dominate the moment, who would finally say something that couldn't be walked back. And once an audience wants rupture, it doesn't reward restraint. On air, the dynamic hardened. Pauses got longer. Interruptions got sharper. Stories that once overlapped now collided. One person would begin a narrative only to have it subtly redirected, reframed, or corrected before it could land cleanly. Listeners noticed the change in breathing alone. The rhythm of the show felt tense, like a room holding its breath. For Ma$E, insiders say the shift triggered a more strategic posture, less free-flowing, more intentional. He began choosing moments instead of filling space, letting silence do more work than words. That silence wasn't passive, it was loaded. Fans read it as restraint. Critics read it as calculation. Either way, it changed how every exchange landed. For Cameron, the response went the opposite direction. More dominance. More steering, more presence. He leaned into control of the room, flipping conversations, punctuating moments with humor that carried an edge. To his supporters, it was leadership. To others, it felt like compensation. The contrast between their styles, once entertaining, now felt like a fault line. Behind the scenes, sources say conversations turned blunt. Not explosive, blunt. The kind of bluntness that comes when people stop pretending friction isn't there. Discussions about show direction allegedly became more frequent and more rigid. What had once been, "let's see how it goes," turned into, "this is how it has to go." And when creative partnerships reach that stage, something always breaks. The internet sensed it immediately. Clips didn't just go viral, they got framed as turning points. This is where it changed. Watch his face right here. Nah, this ain't jokes anymore. Commentary channels stopped speculating about tension and started predicting outcomes. When audiences shift from asking, "is something wrong?" to asking, "what's going to happen next?" the situation has already escalated. Insiders claim the pressure peaked after an episode that felt different even to casual listeners. The jokes were fewer, the laughter shorter, the stories heavier. A conversation about legacy veered into territory that felt less reflective and more comparative. Who stayed solid? Who took risks? Who held things down when others stepped away? No names were called, none were needed. The room went quiet in a way microphones don't usually capture, but this one did. That silence became the most replayed moment of the episode. Off camera, sources described the atmosphere as strained but contained. No shouting matches, no public blow-ups, just a sense that the partnership was being tested by success itself, because the numbers kept climbing. Engagement stayed high. Sponsors remained interested, which meant walking away would look like self-sabotage, and staying meant enduring a dynamic that was growing more adversarial by the week. This is where the trap closed. When money, attention, and rivalry intersect, everyone convinces themselves they can manage it a little longer. One more episode, one more conversation, one more viral clip, but rivalry doesn't stay static. It demands escalation. What worked last week won't feel strong enough next week, and the pressure to top the previous moment becomes unbearable. Insiders say both camps began quietly preparing for contingencies, not exits, options. What happens if someone says something irreversible? What happens if the dynamic tips from competitive to hostile? What happens if the audience turns from entertained to divided beyond repair? These weren't hypothetical questions anymore. They were planning scenarios. Fans could feel it too. Comment sections became more aggressive, less playful, more definitive. People weren't debating tone anymore, they were assigning blame in advance. Choosing winners before a fight had even officially started. That kind of anticipation is dangerous, because it pulls the subjects toward fulfilling the script the audience has already written. The most unsettling part of this phase is how quietly it's happening. No press releases, no dramatic walk-offs, no public declarations, just incremental shifts that signal something is no longer sustainable. When partnerships collapse loudly, at least there's clarity. When they erode slowly, everyone keeps waiting for the moment that explains everything, and that waiting builds pressure. Sources say the hardest realization for both men was the same. The podcast succeeded too well for its own good. The tension that once felt manageable became the engine of the show. And engines don't turn themselves off. They either keep running hotter or they seize. Listeners are now tuning in with a different ear, not for laughs but for tells. A tone change, a hesitation, a line that lands wrong. Every episode feels like it could be the one. The one where something crosses from competitive into personal. The one where someone finally reacts instead of responds. The one where the balance breaks. This isn't about friendship anymore. It's about control. About who sets the tone, who frames the past, who walks away looking authoritative when the dust settles. And those questions don't coexist peacefully in a shared space for long. Insiders say this phase won't last much longer, not because anyone wants it to end, but because pressure like this always forces a decision. Either the rivalry gets named and addressed openly, or it explodes through an unscripted moment nobody can undo. There is no third option. And that's the cliff everyone is standing on now. Because if this is how intense it feels while everyone is still playing it cool, imagine what happens when someone finally decides they're done managing the optics. The microphones are still on, the audience is still watching, and the rivalry has reached the point where the next move won't feel like content at all. It'll feel like a line being crossed live. If you're still here, understand this. You're watching the calm before a very public collision. This isn't just podcast banter or friendly competition anymore. This is what happens when money, ego, history, and microphones collide, and nobody wants to be the first one to blink. Moments like this don't explode out of nowhere. They tighten, episode by episode, until one sentence changes everything. And that's why you can't tune out now. Because when rivalries reach this stage, the next move is never planned. It's emotional, it's unscripted. It's the kind of moment that gets clipped, replayed, and talked about for years while everyone says, "I knew this was coming." If you miss it, you don't just miss drama, you miss context. And context is the only thing that explains why it all went left. So hit like right now if you felt that shift, when the jokes stopped feeling playful and started feeling personal. Drop a comment because the comment section is where people catch the small tells, compare notes, and call out the energy before headlines ever do. And subscribe immediately, because this story isn't moving on a schedule, it's moving on pressure, and pressure breaks without warning. This isn't about choosing sides, it's about staying alert. Because when legends stop pretending everything's cool, it never happens quietly, it happens live on mic with no rewind button. Stay here, stay ready, because the next episode could be the one nobody walks back from.